I never imagined a day like this, sitting in the church, the air thick with the scent of lilies and damp earth. I watched people cry over my son, friends, neighbors, even co-workers I barely knew. Everyone was broken, whispering his name, clutching photographs. And yet in the middle of all that grief, my phone buzzed. A message from her, my daughter-in-law. Can't make it. Yoga class was more important. Sending love. I stared at the words numb, as if they belonged to someone else. The funeral director's voice echoed somewhere behind me, but I barely heard it. My hands shook, gripping the program as if it could anchor me. I thought back to the weeks leading up to this. The arguments, the subtle resentment she'd always carried toward me. The way she treated my son with a casual detachment I hadn't dared to confront. But even then, I never thought she'd skip his funeral. Never thought she'd put downward dog over goodbye. The congregation's sobs filled the room, a wave I couldn't escape. I wanted to yell, to march out and drag her here, but my body refused. My grief pinned me down. Instead, I sat, my chest tight, my mind spinning with memories of my son, his laughter, his stubborn streak, the way he used to hide candy in his desk drawer when he thought I wasn't looking. And through it all, her absence gnawed at me like an unhealed wound. As the preacher spoke about life and loss, I felt a strange mix of fury and sorrow. How could someone be so indifferent to the death of the man they promised to love? I swallowed hard, trying to focus on the voice in front of me, but my heart was somewhere else, replaying every slight, every careless word, every missed chance. When the service ended, people approached me, offering condolences, hands warm on my shoulders, tears wetting my sleeves. And still, I thought of her stretching on her mat, somewhere far away, thinking she had fulfilled some higher calling while the world wept. I slid the program into my pocket and walked out, the autumn wind biting at my face. The sky was pale, gray, indifferent, like her. And I realized that this wasn't just grief. It was betrayal. After the service, I didn't go straight home. I needed air, a place where the weight of everyone else's mourning wouldn't press against me. I drove aimlessly through the quiet streets of our small town, the engine's hum barely cutting through the pounding in my chest. Leaves crunched under tires and in gutters, the scent of smoke from someone's backyard fire mixing with the crisp autumn air. My mind wouldn't stop replaying her message, those casual, almost smug words. Yoga class was more important. I thought about my son, David, 29 years old, full of laughter, dreams, and that stubborn streak I recognized from myself, and now gone, taken suddenly, mercilessly, leaving behind a hole no one could fill. I remembered the night before his death. We had argued, nothing serious really, about bills, chores, life's usual annoyances. But even small words, said carelessly, carry weight when the end is closer than we realize. And then there was her, Emily, always polite, always composed, but distant. I had tried to see her as family, as someone who loved my son, but in that message, all pretense vanished. She didn't care, not about him, not about this family, not about the very ritual that gave us closure. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, imagining her twisting in some yoga pose while our son lay in the ground. The unfairness burned like acid. I pulled into the driveway, but I couldn't go in. The house smelled empty, like it had already absorbed his absence. I wandered into David's room, now eerily untouched, his clothes folded neatly, his guitar leaning against the wall. I ran my fingers over the strings, and they hummed faintly under my touch, as if remembering the hands that once strummed them. I sat on the edge of his bed and let the silence settle around me, a silence that felt heavier than any scream. Hours passed. I didn't answer calls or messages. People came by, bringing food, trying to comfort me, but I was too hollow to respond. And all the while, that text lingered in my mind, the cruel juxtaposition of her calm, detached life and the chaos of ours. Rage and grief warred inside me. I knew I needed to confront her, but how do you confront someone who places a yoga class over a human life? By evening, I found myself driving again, this time to the studio she frequented. The windows were lit warmly, laughter and soft music spilling into the night. I watched her through the glass, moving gracefully, serene, oblivious. My throat tightened. Part of me wanted to storm in, yell, demand apologies, force recognition of what she had forsaken. But another part, quieter, told me that nothing I did could undo what had happened. Some people, I realized, could only show who they were when it mattered most. I drove home, the road winding under the dim glow of street lamps. I thought about David again, about the life we had shared, the small victories and mistakes, the arguments that now seemed trivial. I clenched my fists, feeling both powerless and determined. I would mourn, yes, but I wouldn't let her absence define this moment. She had made her choice, and I would carry my son in every breath, every heartbeat, without needing her approval or presence. That night, I slept poorly, haunted by memories and the soft mocking echo of her words. I dreamed of David laughing, of him scolding me for worrying too much, of her stepping onto a mat while the world broke around her. When I woke, I felt the ache in my chest settle slightly into resolve. This was far from over. She had ignored the funeral, but the life that remained, the family that truly mattered, was mine to honor, and honor it I would. The next morning, the house felt even emptier. I wandered through the rooms, half expecting David to appear around the corner, grumbling about breakfast or some trivial task he'd forgotten. The kitchen smelled faintly of the coffee he always made for himself, the bitter aroma clinging to the countertops like a ghost. I poured myself a cup, too bitter, too hot, and sipped it slowly, letting the burn cut through the hollow ache in my chest. Each swallow reminded me he was gone. Each quiet sound in the house underscored that absence. The mailbox held another letter, ordinary in appearance, but heavy with meaning. It was from her, Emily. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside, a neatly folded note read, "I know this is hard for you. I am thinking of you in my own way." I stared at the words, incredulous. Thinking of me in her own way. She had spent the night bending, stretching, and perfecting poses, while the man she married lay in the cold ground. The words felt like a slap, polite but hollow, an attempt to dress indifference in sympathy. My knuckles whitened around the paper, and I crumpled it into a ball before tossing it across the room. I couldn't stay inside. I drove to the cemetery, hoping the familiar ground, the weight of others' grief, might anchor me. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp leaves and distant smoke from someone's fireplace. I walked past freshly dug graves, past mourners paying silent respects, but none of it mattered. I knelt by David's resting place, tracing the engraved letters with my fingers, feeling the cold stone beneath my fingertips. The wind tugged at my coat and hair, and I felt as if the world itself were whispering the same cruel truth. He was gone, and she had chosen herself over him. I sat there for hours, remembering the small details of his life, the way he used to fiddle with the radio dial in the car, humming along to old rock songs, the stubborn way he insisted on carrying groceries up the stairs himself, even when I offered to help, the way he smiled at me in fleeting moments, as if we shared a secret world no one else could touch. And then I thought about the last time we were all together, the tension thick, the conversations polite but strained, Emily's eyes always flicking to her phone, her fingers twitching to respond to messages she considered more important than family. Anger began to rise, a slow burn beneath the sorrow. I remembered the small cruelties she had shown over the years, subtle, cutting remarks, dismissive gestures, the quiet way she had pushed me to the sidelines of my own son's life. But nothing had felt as raw as this. She hadn't just ignored me, she had ignored the very foundation of our family, the bond between a father and his son. It wasn't just disrespect, it was betrayal on the grandest scale. I found myself pacing the cemetery paths, hands shoved deep into my coat pockets, boots crunching against the gravel. I imagined confronting her, demanding to know how she could place a yoga class above the life she vowed to honor. I imagined standing in the middle of that serene studio, her eyes widening as the truth of her choices hit her. But I knew myself too well. I wasn't going to scream. I wouldn't beg. I would let the absence speak, the consequences of her indifference mark her quietly, painfully. By evening I returned home, the sky bruised with shades of gray and violet. The house felt colder, the shadows longer. I poured another cup of coffee, staring out the window at the empty street. The faint smell of burning leaves drifting through the air. My phone buzzed again. Another message from her. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I already knew the words. Apologies that wouldn't come. Explanations that wouldn't satisfy. Empathy that had never existed. I set the phone down and walked to David's guitar, plucking a few tentative strings. The notes rang hollow, echoing through the empty house, and for a moment, I let myself cry. No one was there to comfort me. No one but the lingering presence of my son, who had always trusted me to protect him. Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, imagining the next steps. I would honor David's memory, yes, but I wouldn't let Emily's indifference define the narrative of our family. I thought about the estate, the shared memories, the things she had always disregarded. I thought about community, friends who had shown up, neighbors who had brought casseroles, co-workers who had remembered his jokes. I realized that family wasn't just the people bound by marriage. Family was the people who stood when it mattered, and she had chosen not to stand. The following day, I began the work of arranging the small affairs David had left behind. Clothes, books, personal notes tucked away in drawers. Each item was a memory, a fragment of the life he lived. As I sorted, I felt a quiet resolve building. Emily could choose her yoga poses, her social calendar, her comfort, but I would choose action. I would choose to honor, to remember, to carry forward the essence of my son in every choice I made. I would become the anchor for those who mattered, the voice of memory and love for the son I had lost too soon. And then, in the stillness, the quiet spark of what I could do began to take shape. I would gather those who had loved David, those who had been faithful and present, and build something enduring, a legacy that she could never touch with her indifference. She might skip the funeral, ignore the grief, and turn her back on the life she was part of. But she could never erase what truly mattered. The wind howled outside as night fell, rustling the last of the leaves. I sat in the dark, sipping coffee that had long since gone cold, and I made a vow. The life we had, the memories, the love, that would be mine to protect. Not with anger, not with confrontation, but with presence, with care, with unwavering remembrance. Emily's choices would speak for themselves, but I would act for those who deserved it. And in that, I found the first flicker of peace amidst the storm of grief. The next morning, I woke before dawn, the gray light seeping through the blinds, painting the room in muted shadows. Sleep had been fitful, full of half-formed dreams where David's laughter echoed in empty hallways, followed immediately by Emily's indifferent smile. I dressed slowly, mechanically, and went outside, needing movement, air, something solid to hold on to. The streets were quiet, frost glinting on rooftops and leaves, crunching beneath my boots as I walked. My chest ached with a strange mixture of sadness and mounting determination. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could control how I responded to it. I drove to the yoga studio, not to confront her, not yet, not in anger. I needed information, clarity. I parked a block away and watched through the tall windows. Emily moved gracefully among the students, counting breaths, shifting effortlessly between poses. Her calm focus, the way she commanded attention without effort, made my stomach twist. I felt envy, yes, but also a simmering fury. She could dedicate hours to her own pursuits, while my son lay in the ground, and she would carry on as if nothing had happened. I left before anyone noticed me. I drove aimlessly, thinking about my options. The estate, the friends, the people who truly loved David, all of it became my mental map. I realized that grief alone wasn't enough. I had to act, and action had to mean more than just mourning. I needed to create something tangible, something that honored my son and exposed the absence of care from those who pretended to matter. By afternoon, I was back home, sorting through David's belongings. Every piece told a story: letters, journals, photographs. I came across a small stack of notes he had written, almost like a journal but brief and informal. One in particular caught my eye. "Life is too short for pretending. Don't waste time on people who don't care." I pressed it to my chest, tears stinging my eyes. He had known, even then, about her distance, her lack of genuine affection, and he had understood something I was only now beginning to grasp. Family isn't always what the papers say, or the titles, or the social customs. Family is who shows up when it matters. I made calls, friends, neighbors, anyone who had been close to David. Slowly, a plan took shape. I would hold a memorial in his honor. Not a formal funeral, not a religious ceremony, but a gathering of people who had loved him, remembered him, laughed with him, cried with him. Emily wouldn't be invited. Her absence at the funeral had spoken volumes. She would not define this event. By evening, I was drafting invitations, calling old friends, organizing spaces, thinking through logistics. Every decision carried the weight of grief, but also the thrill of reclaiming control. I realized that in her absence, I had found a strange freedom. She had believed that ignoring the sorrow would minimize its impact, but in reality, it amplified my own resolve. I would honor my son, and I would do it in a way that mattered, in a way that celebrated the life he had lived. Sleep came late, uneasy, but at least it came. I dreamed again, this time of David, standing tall, smiling proudly, as if he approved of my efforts. When I woke, the plan felt real, alive. I went through the motions, preparing the space, arranging flowers, setting chairs, coordinating music. Each task was a step toward healing, a way to channel anger and loss into something that transcended bitterness. The day of the memorial arrived. Friends, neighbors, colleagues, people I hadn't seen in years began to gather. There was laughter, soft and tentative, tears glistening in eyes that remembered. Stories were shared, anecdotes recounted, memories of David's stubborn charm, his quick wit, his kindness. I watched the crowd, my chest tight, realizing that even though Emily had chosen herself over my son, the world had not. There were people who loved him, who remembered him, who refused to let him be forgotten. And in that, I found a quiet satisfaction, a sense of justice in the most subtle form. I didn't speak much. My role was to observe, to witness, to let the others express the grief and the love that she had ignored. And yet, in that silence, I felt stronger. I understood something profound. Life didn't stop with loss. It demanded engagement, presence, action. I could not resurrect my son, but I could create ripples of memory and affection that ensured his life was honored beyond the cold indifference of one person. By evening, as the memorial wound down, I stood alone by the garden, the scent of autumn leaves and candles lingering in the air. I felt exhaustion, yes, but also a powerful sense of closure. I had turned grief into remembrance, anger into purpose. Emily would never understand this, nor would she attempt to, but that was no longer my concern. My focus was on the living, on the memories that would continue, on the people who mattered. I drove home in silence, the empty streets a mirror of my own solitude. And yet, it was a different solitude than before. No longer hollow and enraged, but resolute, steady. I thought of David, of the life he had lived, of the impact he had on everyone around him. And for the first time since his passing, I felt that I could breathe without the sharp sting of betrayal dominating every thought. That night I sat by the window, coffee in hand, watching the moonlight shimmer across the quiet street. I allowed myself a small smile, remembering his mischievous grin, the warmth of his hand on my shoulder, the jokes we had shared. Emily's absence had hurt, yes, but it had also illuminated something I had forgotten: the strength of love, the resilience of memory, and the power of presence. I had chosen to act, and in that choice, I had reclaimed a piece of life she thought she could take from me. As sleep finally claimed me, I dreamed of David laughing, dancing in a sunlit field, the people who truly loved him surrounding him with warmth and joy. And in that dream, I realized that the life he had lived and the love he had left behind was more enduring, more powerful than any absence, any slight, any neglect. And I knew without doubt that I would continue to honor him every single day, no matter what Emily chose to do or not do. The morning after the memorial, the house felt lighter somehow, but the absence of Emily still pressed against me like a shadow. I moved through the rooms, touching the furniture, the photographs, The remnants of ordinary life, all imbued now with extraordinary grief. Each object carried a memory of David, but also a quiet reminder of the family she had chosen to ignore. I realized that I was no longer grieving only for my son. I was grieving for the emptiness she had left in her wake, the betrayal of promises, of vows she had made silently with every shared meal, every family holiday. I decided it was time to face her. Not with shouting, not with anger, but with truth. I needed her to understand, in some concrete way, the weight of what she had abandoned. I didn't expect apologies, not real ones. I didn't even care if she tried to rationalize her absence. What I wanted was recognition, the acknowledgement that she had missed the moment that defined loyalty, that defined family. I drove to her apartment, the early autumn sun glinting off the windshield, warming my hands on the steering wheel. My heart pounded with anticipation, but also with the strange steadiness that comes from certainty. I had rehearsed the conversation 100 times in my head, each iteration stripping away unnecessary words until only the essential truth remained. I would speak, she would listen, or she wouldn't. Either way, I would leave knowing I had spoken. The door opened almost immediately. Emily stood there, hair pulled back, wearing the calm, polished expression that had always frustrated me. "Oh," she said lightly, as if my presence was merely an interruption to her morning. "I didn't expect you." I stepped inside anyway, closing the door softly behind me. The apartment smelled faintly of incense, a mixture of lavender and sandalwood, something meant to calm, to soothe, to mask reality. I wanted to rip open the pretense, but I held myself steady. I let her see the weight in my eyes, the exhaustion, the grief that had not been softened by time or distraction. "I came here because I need you to understand something," I began, my voice calm but firm. "David died, and you chose to be somewhere else. You chose your comfort, your routine, your self-interest over him, over this family." She tilted her head, a small frown, almost dismissive, like a teacher correcting a minor misunderstanding. I thought the memorial could be." She paused, searching for words that wouldn't exist. "I was sending my thoughts. That's what matters, right?" I shook my head slowly, feeling a heat rise inside me, but I didn't yell. "No, it's not what matters. Thoughts don't carry weight. Presence does. Actions do. You were absent when it counted the most, and that absence isn't something I can ignore." She took a small step back, as if I had suddenly grown taller, larger, more imposing than she remembered. She started, but I cut her off, not in anger, but with an inevitability that left no room for excuses. "You don't get to rewrite this moment, Emily. You don't get to say later that you cared. You didn't show it. You missed the funeral. You missed your husband's life. And now, you see how that absence echoes. It isn't just about grief. It's about what you prioritize, what you respect, and what you refuse to honor." Silence filled the apartment. Her fingers twitched slightly, a faint sign of unease. For the first time, I saw the edge of something beneath her polished exterior. Discomfort, guilt, a flicker of understanding. Not regret, not yet, but recognition. I didn't linger long after that. I turned, walking back to the door, feeling the weight in my chest lift slightly with each step. I had spoken. I had confronted. I had expressed what mattered. My son's memory was no longer just a shadow in my home. It was a force, a reminder that life was measured by presence, by love, by the choices we make when it matters most. Back in my car, I drove to the park where David and I used to sit on weekends, watching kids play, listening to the distant hum of city life. The leaves rustled under the occasional gust of wind, a crisp, earthy scent filling my senses. I closed my eyes and let myself remember him fully. His stubborn laugh, the teasing way he would push my buttons, the quiet moments where he'd just sit beside me and let life pass without words. He was gone, yes, but his essence lingered in every memory, every touchstone of the places we had shared. By evening I returned home exhausted, but with a calm clarity that hadn't been there before. I started writing letters, not to Emily, not to anyone in particular, but to David. I wrote down the memories, the stories, the moments of love and frustration, the laughter and the tears. Each word was a tribute, a tangible acknowledgement that his life mattered, and that I would carry it forward. The letters piled up, each one a small testament to presence and memory. And through it all, I realized something profound. Emily's absence, her disregard, had not diminished the life we had shared with David. In fact, it had clarified it. It had stripped away pretense and forced me to see clearly who mattered, who loved, and who was capable of honoring what truly counted. That night, I slept with a sense of purpose. Grief was still there, yes, sharp and persistent, but it had a direction now. It wasn't aimless. It wasn't hollow. It was the driving force to preserve memory, to create legacy, to act when it mattered. And in that, I found a fragile yet undeniable peace. Emily might continue her life untouched by conscience, but I had found my own path, a way to transform absence into meaning, grief into action, and loss into something enduring. The days after the confrontation were quieter, but the silence was different now, less hollow, more deliberate. I spent mornings walking through the neighborhood, the crisp air carrying the faint smell of wood smoke and wet leaves. Each step felt like a reclamation, a way to anchor myself in a world that had once seemed to spin out of control. I noticed details I hadn't before. The way sunlight hit the corner of a brick building, the soft chatter of children heading to school, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from a corner cafe. Life went on, even when it didn't feel like it should, and I began to feel the subtle pull of hope. I also began to organize David's things more methodically. His room, once untouched, became a place of reflection rather than mourning. I hung photographs, letters, and mementos on a corkboard, creating a visual narrative of his life. Each piece reminded me not only of the son I had lost, but also of the love and loyalty that had surrounded him. Friends who had shown up, neighbors who had cared, and even strangers who had offered small kindnesses. Emily's absence was stark against this tapestry, but her absence no longer held power over me. One afternoon I received a call from one of David's close friends, a woman named Claire, who had been like a sister to him in college. "We're thinking of organizing a volunteer project in his name," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Something that keeps his memory alive. Would you want to be involved?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I replied immediately. "I'll do whatever it takes." Over the next few days, I coordinated with Claire and several others, planning a small community initiative, a scholarship fund for local kids, something that reflected David's passion for helping others and giving back. The work was taxing, emotionally and physically, but every email, every phone call, every meeting was a step toward transforming grief into purpose. I felt alive in a way I hadn't since the funeral, a focus and clarity that cut through the fog of despair. Emily, of course, remained absent from all of it. She didn't ask, she didn't inquire, she didn't attempt to involve herself. Her yoga classes continued. Her life proceeded uninterrupted, as if the death of her husband had only a minor effect on the world around her. And each time I thought of her absence, it no longer made me bitter. It strengthened me. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. I would honor David in every action I took, and I would do it fully, without waiting for acknowledgement or approval. One evening, as I was compiling a list of donors and supporters for the scholarship, I noticed an envelope slipped under the door. It was from her. My hands hesitated over it, and for a moment I considered tossing it aside unread, but something compelled me to open it. Inside was a card, elegantly designed, with a brief note: "I'm sorry for my absence. I hope you can forgive me someday." I read it once, then again, feeling a faint stir of anger, quickly replaced by a quiet amusement. Forgiveness? She had missed the funeral, ignored the grief, and yet expected a simple word to erase months of absence and indifference. I folded the card carefully and set it aside. This was hers to hold. It didn't affect my actions, my purpose, or my remembrance of David. That night I took a long walk to the park where David and I had spent countless afternoons. The sun had just set, painting the sky in shades of amber and purple. The air was cool, the scent of damp earth sharp and invigorating. I found an empty bench and sat, letting the memories of my son wash over me. I remembered his laughter, his stubbornness, the way he would argue passionately about things that mattered to him. I remembered the small moments too, The way he would nudge me when he wanted a story. The way he insisted on carrying heavy bags even when I begged him not to. And through it all, I felt a sense of connection that death could not sever. A few families passed by, children running ahead of their parents, laughing and shouting. I watched them, and I realized something profound. Life continued, in all its chaos, beauty, and imperfection. And in that continuation, I saw my role, not just as a father mourning a son, but as a guardian of his memory, a vessel for the love and lessons he left behind. Emily's absence had taught me something crucial. Presence matters more than words, action more than intent. I had been given a chance to demonstrate that truth, and I was embracing it fully. Returning home, I sat at my desk and began drafting a letter. Not to Emily, not to anyone in particular, but as a manifesto of remembrance and action. I wrote about David, about the scholarship, about the lives he had touched, and the love he had inspired. I wrote with clarity, with purpose, with the weight of someone who had faced profound loss, and found a way to transform it into meaning. Every sentence was a tribute, every paragraph a step toward creating a legacy that Emily's absence could never diminish. By the time I finished, the house was silent, the night deep and still. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the exhaustion that comes from days filled with purpose and nights filled with reflection. I allowed myself a small, private smile. The grief was still there, yes, but it had been tempered by action. The betrayal still stung, but it had been absorbed into something greater, a determination to honor my son, to protect his memory, and to live in a way that celebrated the love and loyalty he had brought into my life. And in that moment, I knew that I had begun to reclaim not only my own sense of purpose, but also the meaning of family itself. Not the family defined by marriage or convenience, but the family defined by care, presence, and unwavering love. Emily could continue her life untouched by conscience, but I had discovered something far more enduring: the ability to act, to remember, and to honor those who truly mattered. The days blurred into weeks, yet the weight of David's absence never fully lifted. Each morning I woke with a lingering ache, a reminder that nothing could bring him back. But the ache no longer paralyzed me, it propelled me. I spent my mornings reviewing scholarship applications, speaking with local teachers, and coordinating small community events in his memory. The project had grown faster than I expected. People wanted to contribute, to be part of something that honored a life cut too short. Every phone call, every meeting, every handshake was a thread connecting me to a network of individuals who, unlike Emily, truly understood the power of presence. Emily, predictably, remained distant. She never called, never visited, never asked about the memorial or the scholarship. Occasionally, I would receive a vague message or a card that I could barely classify as an apology, and I would set it aside without opening it. I realized that her absence was no longer something to fight against. It was a constant, a backdrop to my own active engagement with the world. She had chosen her comfort over confrontation, her routines over responsibility, and in doing so, she had ceded the moral ground. One afternoon, I found myself standing in the local community center, helping set up a room for a small gathering of students who were finalists for the scholarship. The air smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning products, a sterile scent that somehow contrasted sharply with the warmth of anticipation in the room. Young faces turned toward me, some nervous, some excited, others simply curious. I felt a swell of pride and sorrow at the same time. These kids reminded me of David in countless small ways. The stubborn glint in their eyes, the curiosity that wouldn't quit, the potential waiting to be nurtured. As I walked among them, helping adjust chairs and straighten tables, I thought about the life my son had led and the lives he had touched without even realizing it. I had been consumed by grief and anger in the immediate aftermath of his death, but now I saw clearly. The legacy he left was not defined by absence or presence at funerals, but by action, love, and the subtle ways people remembered him. And I was determined to keep that legacy alive. The scholarship ceremony began with quiet conversation and laughter, the kind that builds connections slowly and naturally. I listened to the children talk about their dreams. Some wanted to be engineers, some teachers, some artists. I felt a deep, unrelenting sense of purpose. Every application I had read, every conversation I had had, every effort I had poured into this project was worth it. And in that room, filled with hope and ambition, I could feel David's spirit, not as a ghost, but as the force behind my work, guiding and affirming me. After the ceremony, I stayed behind to help clean up, my hands raw from moving chairs and carrying boxes, but my heart lighter. I stepped outside into the early evening, the chill in the air biting at my cheeks, and I watched the sky streak with orange and purple. The neighborhood was quiet, the sound of distant traffic mingling with the rustle of leaves. And then my phone buzzed. I saw her name, Emily. I stared at it, a mix of annoyance and curiosity rising inside me. She rarely reached out, and when she did, it was always calculated. I opened the message. It read simply, "I want to see the scholarship project. I want to understand what David meant to so many people." My first impulse was to ignore it, to let it sit unanswered. But then I realized something. Her words were empty gestures, but they also provided an opportunity. She had missed the funeral, yes, but she had now expressed a faint interest, however belated, in acknowledging what she had ignored. I replied succinctly, "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. at the community center." Short, neutral, devoid of emotion. I wanted her presence to be factual, not triumphant, and I wanted it to serve the story of David, not the narrative of her own convenience. The next morning I arrived early, arranging the chairs, adjusting the display boards with photographs and letters from David, and setting up a small table with awards and certificates. The room smelled faintly of paper and varnish, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. When Emily arrived, she entered quietly, her polished demeanor intact, but her eyes betraying a flicker of unease. She looked around, taking in the photographs, the notes, the faces of the students. For a moment, I saw something like recognition in her expression, an understanding that she had been absent, and that the consequences of that absence were tangible. We walked through the room together, silently, as I explained the purpose of each display and the stories behind the scholarship. Her responses were minimal, polite, measured. I didn't expect anything more. This wasn't about her redemption. This was about David. Her presence, belated as it was, would serve as a mirror, reflecting the gravity of what she had missed. By the time we finished the tour, Emily was silent. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need acknowledgement. What mattered was that she saw the impact of her absence, the lives David had touched, the love he had inspired, and the respect he had earned from those who truly mattered. And in that silence, I felt a profound sense of closure. I had acted, I had honored my son, and I had reclaimed the narrative that she had attempted to control through her indifference. After she left, I stood alone in the room, the echo of her footsteps fading, and I allowed myself a moment to breathe. The scholarship, the memorials, the gatherings, they were more than events. They were living proof that love, presence, and action mattered more than excuses or convenience. Emily's absence had initially fueled my anger, but it had ultimately strengthened my resolve, forcing me to create something enduring from the void she left. As the sun set outside, casting golden light across the photographs of my son, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. The grief remained, yes, but it was tempered by purpose. The betrayal of absence had been transformed into a powerful motivator, driving me to preserve memory, foster growth, and honor life. I had turned what could have been a narrative of loss into one of action, resilience, and enduring love. And in that transformation, I realized that I was no longer just a father mourning a son. I was a guardian of his legacy, a witness to his impact, and a living testament to the power of presence. The following week, I found myself in the middle of organizing the next phase of the scholarship program. It wasn't just about handing out awards anymore. It was about building a sustainable network of mentorship, guidance, and encouragement for the students. I spent hours on the phone, arranging meetings with teachers, local business owners, and volunteers who could offer their expertise and time. Every conversation reminded me of what David had always known intuitively: the value of community, the importance of showing up, of investing in the lives of others. Emily was still mostly absent from the process, Though occasionally I would receive perfunctory messages or vague questions about logistics, I ignored most of them. I had realized by now that her interest was reactive, fleeting, and centered on her own image, rather than any genuine connection to our son's memory. Her presence, or lack thereof, had ceased to define me. She had forfeited that power the moment she chose her yoga class over the funeral. One late afternoon, I visited a local high school to meet some of the students who were potential scholarship recipients. Walking through the halls, hearing the buzz of teenage chatter, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. These kids were full of energy, ideas, dreams, but also insecurity and fear. And in many ways, I saw David in them. His curiosity, his determination, his occasional stubbornness. I realized that part of honoring my son was ensuring that these traits could thrive, nurtured and recognized. I spoke with the students individually, listening to their aspirations, offering advice, and encouraging them to pursue their passions relentlessly. Some were shy, hesitant to speak, but gradually, as trust grew, they opened up. They shared their struggles with homework, family, and their own sense of self-worth. I offered guidance where I could, but mostly I listened. Each story, each voice, reminded me that life was not just about loss or betrayal. It was about presence, support, and commitment. By the time I left the school, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the pavement. I drove home slowly, the crisp air filling the car, and thought about how far I had come in the weeks since David's funeral. My grief was still present, but it no longer consumed me. It had transformed into something actionable, something enduring. I had built a living monument to my son, one that she could not ignore, diminish, or erase. That evening, I returned home to find another message from Emily. This one was different, short, hesitant, and unmistakably personal. I saw what you did today. I didn't realize how much impact this would have. I stared at it for a long moment. Recognition. A faint, belated acknowledgement of the world she had ignored. I didn't respond immediately. I wanted to see if her words would lead to action or remain empty gestures. The next morning, she appeared at the community center without prior notice. I had just finished arranging a new display board, photographs and letters from David meticulously organized. She walked in quietly, her expression more somber than usual. I greeted her without embellishment, neutral, factual, measured. She didn't speak at first, instead walking slowly around the room, taking in the photographs, the letters, the tangible evidence of the impact of our son's life. Finally she spoke, her voice low. I didn't understand. I didn't see what I was missing until now. I listened quietly, letting her words fill the room without response. This wasn't about validation or forgiveness. It was about acknowledgement, the recognition that her absence had consequences, and that the life she had neglected had been celebrated in her absence anyway. I led her through the scholarship materials, showing her the essays, the applications, the letters of recommendation. I introduced her to a few of the students who had directly benefited from the program. She observed quietly, nodding at appropriate moments, her composure intact, but there was a vulnerability there I had never seen before. She realized finally that the choices she had made, choosing comfort, routine, and convenience over presence, had been starkly insufficient when weighed against love and memory. After the tour, we sat quietly in a corner of the community center, the soft hum of activity around us. I didn't lecture her, didn't demand apologies. Instead, I let the silence speak. Her absence had defined her for weeks, but now, witnessing the life and impact of our son, she could not pretend that her decisions were inconsequential. And in that silent acknowledgement, I felt a subtle shift. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but recognition. When she finally left, I stood alone in the community center, the smell of paper, varnish, and faint coffee lingering in the air. I allowed myself to breathe, to feel the weight lift slightly from my chest. I realized that this was the moment I had been building toward. Not the confrontation, not the anger, not even the grief itself, but the demonstration that love, presence, and action were more powerful than neglect, absence, or indifference. Driving home, I reflected on the journey. Emily's absence had been a catalyst, painful and infuriating, but ultimately instructive. It forced me to step into action, to channel grief into tangible legacy, to honor David in ways that transcended mourning. Her belated acknowledgement was neither victory nor redemption. It was simply recognition of what had always existed, of what I had chosen to create in his memory. By the time I reached home, night had fallen, stars faintly glimmering in the sky. I sat by the window, looking out at the quiet street, the crisp air filling my lungs, and I allowed myself a moment of reflection. The grief remained, yes, but it was tempered by purpose. The betrayal of absence had been transformed into a force for good, driving me to honor memory, foster growth, and create enduring impact. I had turned loss into action, and in doing so, had reclaimed not only my son's legacy, but also my own capacity for love, resilience, and influence. Weeks passed, each day blurring into the next, filled with the steady rhythm of work, memory, and quiet reflection. The scholarship program had grown beyond what I had anticipated, now encompassing mentoring sessions, local workshops, and a small fund for extracurricular projects that the students were passionate about. Each initiative reminded me of David, not just of the son I had lost, but of the young man who had always lived with integrity, compassion, and determination. He had left a mark on the world, and I was determined to preserve and expand it. Emily had been a shadow in the background. Her sporadic messages had slowed to nothing, and her rare appearances at community events were brief and polite, but emotionally hollow. I realized she was watching from afar, unsure of how to engage, but still unable to completely ignore what had been set in motion without her presence. Her absence no longer wounded me. Instead, it served as a quiet contrast, highlighting the real impact of presence, commitment, and action. One Saturday morning, I drove to the local park where the scholarship recipients had gathered for a group project, a cleanup and planting initiative that David had envisioned in his quiet way months before his passing. The air was sharp with the scent of freshly turned earth, leaves rustling under the occasional gust of wind. The kids worked eagerly, laughter and chatter mixing with the rustling of branches and the soft thud of shovels striking soil. I moved among them, offering guidance, encouragement, and praise. Each smile, each small accomplishment, felt like a tribute to David's life, a tangible reminder that his influence persisted. As I worked, I reflected on the journey so far. Grief had been a constant companion, a weight that pressed against every thought, every breath. Yet, in channeling that grief into action, I had discovered a clarity and purpose I hadn't known was possible. I had learned that absence, Emily's in particular, could be transformed into motivation, a force that pushed me toward meaningful engagement rather than despair. I realized that I had been gifted the opportunity to demonstrate, in a very real and lasting way, what it meant to honor someone's life fully. By mid-afternoon, the project was complete. The park looked transformed, trees planted, flower beds arranged, litter cleared, pathways swept. The students gathered around, their faces bright with accomplishment, sharing stories, laughter, and small triumphs. I felt a swell of pride and sorrow at once. Pride, because these young people had embraced the work with genuine enthusiasm, learning valuable lessons in community and responsibility. Sorrow, because I knew my son would never see the impact he had inspired firsthand. Yet in that sorrow, there was also a strange comfort. His life, though brief, had created ripples that extended far beyond what anyone could measure. After the students dispersed, I stayed behind for a while, walking slowly among the newly planted trees and flowers. The scent of damp soil mixed with the fading warmth of the afternoon sun, creating a sense of serenity that had been elusive in the weeks following the funeral. I thought about Emily again, not with anger, not with resentment, but with a quiet acknowledgement. Her choices, her absence, had highlighted the contrast between superficial gestures and meaningful action. And in that acknowledgement, I found a sense of closure I had been chasing without even realizing it. Returning home, I found another envelope slipped under the door. It was from her again. I hesitated before opening it, a mixture of curiosity and exasperation tightening my chest. Inside was a note, handwritten this time, more personal than the previous messages. I saw the project today. I understand now what I missed. I wish I had been there. I'm sorry. I set it down without immediate response, feeling a mix of emotions. Recognition had finally arrived, elated and incomplete, but it was enough. I didn't need her presence to validate my actions or the memory of my son. The work itself, the tangible impact on the lives of others, was validation enough. That evening I sat on the porch, the cool night air carrying the faint scent of burning leaves from a neighbor's fire. Stars shimmered faintly in the clear sky, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel a sense of profound calm. Grief remained, yes, but it had transformed into a quiet determination. Absence, betrayal, and neglect had been turned into lessons, into action, into enduring legacy. I realized that life's value wasn't measured by words alone, or even by presence in formal ceremonies. It was measured by the choices we made when it mattered most. Sleep came easier that night, filled with dreams of David laughing, running through fields with the students whose lives he had inspired. His voice echoed softly in my mind, a reminder that love, memory, and action could transcend even the most devastating absence. And when I woke the next morning, I carried that clarity with me, ready to continue the work, to honor his life, and to act in ways that reflected the values he had embodied. Emily's absence, once a source of pain, had become a backdrop against which I could measure meaningful action. She had chosen comfort and routine over responsibility and presence, and in doing so, she had illuminated the path I needed to take. I was no longer defined by anger or betrayal. I was defined by commitment, action, and love, the very qualities that had made David's life so impactful, and that would continue to shape the lives of others long after his passing. By late afternoon, I found myself back at the community center, reviewing plans for the next phase of the scholarship. Each decision, each conversation, each task was an act of remembrance, a living tribute to my son. And in that work, I felt a quiet, unshakable truth. Grief could be transformed, absence could be transcended, and legacy could be built with love, consistency, and unwavering presence. The following morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before David's passing. The scholarship program had taken on a life of its own, and I realized that it was no longer just about honoring him. It was about creating a lasting, living tribute that would continue to impact lives long after we were gone. The students, the families, the volunteers, they had become an extended family, one that understood the importance of showing up, of giving, of remembering. I walked through the empty house, the air still tinged with the faint aroma of old coffee and faint candle smoke from the evenings I had spent reflecting on David. Each room reminded me of him, not as a source of pain, but as inspiration. I paused in his old bedroom, running my fingers over his guitar, now tuned and ready for the next session of music workshops we had organized in his memory. The sound of a single note vibrating under my touch echoed softly through the room, a quiet reminder that life, even in absence, leaves traces that cannot be erased. By mid-morning, I was at the community center, overseeing a new initiative, a mentorship program pairing scholarship recipients with local professionals who could guide them in their chosen fields. The students arrived, buzzing with excitement, and I felt a swell of pride. Seeing them, I remembered David's energy, his curiosity, his insistence on questioning the world around him. These young people carried that same spark, and it was my responsibility, my honor, to nurture it. Emily had sent another message the night before, asking if she could attend the session. I paused before responding, considering the implications. She had been absent, indifferent, yet now she wanted to witness the impact of the work that had grown out of grief and dedication. I replied simply, yes, 10 a.m., careful not to add any emotional weight to the interaction. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was about allowing her to see the consequences of her choices without granting her control over the narrative. When she arrived, she was silent, observing the room with a measured gaze. I led her through the activities, introducing her to students, explaining the structure of the program, and showing her the tangible results of the scholarship fund. She asked a few questions, carefully chosen, and I answered them plainly, without embellishment or emotion. Her presence was polite but distant, and I realized that witnessing the life we were creating was the only acknowledgement she was capable of offering. That, too, was enough. The morning passed quickly, filled with laughter, learning, and quiet moments of reflection. I watched the students engage, their faces bright with curiosity and determination. Each success, each small achievement, was a tribute to David's memory. I felt his presence in every corner of the room, in every smile, in every question asked and answered. He had inspired this work, and now, in a way, he was living through it. After the session ended, I stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. The sun was low, casting golden light across the community center and the park beyond. I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. This was the fruit of grief transformed into action, of absence transformed into legacy. Emily had witnessed it, yes, but her acknowledgement was secondary. What mattered was the life we were sustaining, the future we were shaping, the impact that would continue long after the pain of loss had faded. Driving home, I reflected on the journey. The weeks since the funeral had been filled with sorrow, anger, and moments of despair, but they had also been a testament to resilience, commitment, and love. I had learned that grief could be harnessed, that absence could be transformed into motivation, and that the legacy of a loved one could be preserved not through mourning alone, but through purposeful, sustained action. That evening, I sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. The air was cool, the faint scent of leaves and earth grounding me in the present. I thought about David, about his laughter, his stubbornness, the moments of tenderness and mischief that had defined his life. I allowed myself to smile, to remember him fully without the sharp edge of grief cutting through my chest. He was gone, yes, but the life he had lived, and the lives he had touched, were enduring. Emily's absence, once a source of rage and sorrow, had become a backdrop against which the meaning of presence, action, and love had been revealed. She had chosen comfort over responsibility, routine over connection, and in doing so, she had inadvertently illuminated the path I needed to follow. I was no longer defined by anger, resentment, or the betrayal of absence. I was defined by commitment, by the choices I made in the wake of loss, and by the enduring impact of my actions. Later that night, I sat by the fireplace, reviewing letters from students and parents, their gratitude palpable in every word. Each message reinforced the reality that David's life had created ripples far beyond our home, beyond the funeral, beyond the fleeting attention of someone who had failed to honor him. I realized that this was the true measure of legacy, not the presence of those who claim to care, but the tangible, lasting impact of love, attention, and effort. As sleep approached, I allowed myself one final reflection for the day. Emily's absence had been a painful catalyst, but it had also been instructive. It had forced me to focus on what truly mattered, to act decisively, and to honor David's life in ways that no apology or presence could replicate. The scholarship program, the mentorship initiatives, the students who had grown and thrived under our guidance, they were living proof that love and action endure beyond grief and neglect. And in that realization, I felt a deep, abiding peace. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led me to a place of clarity, purpose, and fulfillment. I had transformed loss into legacy, absence into meaning, and sorrow into action. David's life, and the love that had shaped it, would continue to inspire, guide, and uplift those who followed. And in that enduring presence, I found a measure of comfort, closure, and quiet triumph that no absence could ever diminish. The following week brought a quiet rhythm I hadn't expected, a sense of normalcy interwoven with the constant awareness of David's absence. Each morning I walked through the empty house, pausing in rooms that once held laughter, arguments, and mundane conversations. The spaces were now filled with echoes of memory, but they no longer felt suffocating. Instead, they were reminders, gentle nudges that life had to be honored, not merely endured. I had begun to embrace the fullness of grief as a compass, guiding my actions toward meaning rather than despair. At the community center that morning, the scholarship program had taken on a life of its own. Students arrived with enthusiasm, clutching notebooks and portfolios, ready to engage with the mentoring program that had expanded under my guidance. I greeted them quietly, offering encouragement, helping them set goals, and facilitating discussions about their aspirations. Their energy, curiosity, and determination reminded me of David, his relentless drive, his stubborn commitment to what mattered, his quiet courage in pursuing his dreams. Each interaction reinforced the importance of presence and the tangible impact that consistent action could have on shaping lives. Emily had not reached out for several days, and in a strange way, her absence no longer concerned me. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. The contrast between us was stark. I was creating legacy through tangible action, while she remained in the shadows, her acknowledgement sporadic, insufficient, and belated. And yet, I sensed that her distance allowed me to act with clarity, unclouded by the need to seek approval or manage appearances. This was my work, my tribute, and my responsibility. By mid-afternoon, the students had completed a series of workshops designed to foster critical thinking, leadership, and creativity. I moved among them, listening, guiding, and encouraging. One student, a quiet boy named Marcus, approached me timidly with a sketchpad. "I wanted to show you something," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I knelt beside him as he carefully turned the pages, revealing a series of drawings inspired by David's life, his laughter, his kindness, his unwavering curiosity. Each illustration captured the essence of the young man we were honoring. I felt a lump in my throat, overwhelmed by the resonance of legacy taking shape before my eyes. When the workshops concluded, I took a moment to step outside, breathing in the crisp autumn air, scented faintly with damp leaves and distant smoke. I walked through the park adjacent to the community center, reflecting on how far I had come since the funeral. Grief had been transformed into action, anger into determination, and absence into purpose. Every tree planted, every student mentored, every smile witnessed was a tangible testament to David's life, a living memorial that could never be undone. Later, as I returned home, I found another envelope slipped under the door. My first instinct was to ignore it, but I unfolded it carefully. Inside was a note from Emily. "I visited the center today. Seeing the work you've done, it's more than I imagined. I understand now, though I know it doesn't make up for my absence. I am sorry." I read it twice, feeling a mix of emotions, surprise, residual anger, and a strange sense of satisfaction. Recognition had finally arrived, not as a demand for reconciliation, but as an acknowledgement of the reality she had ignored. I did not respond immediately. There was no need. Her apology, tentative and incomplete as it was, held little sway over the work I had accomplished or the legacy I continued to build. What mattered was not her recognition, but the enduring presence of David's influence in the lives around me. I set the note aside and poured myself a cup of coffee, savoring the quiet moment, the warmth in my hands, the faint aroma drifting into the air. That evening I took a long walk through the neighborhood, the streets quiet, the fading light casting long shadows over the trees and sidewalks. I reflected on the journey, the weeks of grief, anger, confrontation, and eventual action. I had transformed pain into purpose, absence into motivation, and sorrow into lasting impact. Emily's choices had illuminated the path I needed to take, but they no longer held power over me. I was defined by my actions, my commitment to memory, and the tangible results of love and presence. As night fell, I returned home and sat by the fireplace, reviewing letters and emails from students and parents. Their words were filled with gratitude, admiration, and hope. I read each one carefully, letting their sincerity wash over me. Every sentence, every paragraph, every phrase was a reminder that legacy was not measured by appearances or fleeting gestures, but by consistent, meaningful action. In that reflection, I felt a profound sense of fulfillment, a quiet, enduring victory born from love, grief, and determination. Later, I sat by David's guitar, strumming a few chords softly. The notes resonated through the room, filling the space with echoes of memory and presence. I allowed myself to think of him fully, not with sharp pangs of grief, but with warmth, pride, and a sense of purpose. His life, though cut short, had inspired action, transformation, and enduring impact, and in that inspiration, I found a measure of peace. As sleep approached, I reflected one last time. Emily's absence had been a painful catalyst, yes, but it had also been instructive. It had forced me to focus on what truly mattered, to act decisively, and to honor David's life in ways that transcended mourning alone. The students, the scholarship program, and the ongoing mentorship initiatives were living proof that love and action endure beyond grief, neglect, and absence. And in that realization, I felt an abiding peace. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led me to a place of clarity, purpose, and fulfillment. I had transformed loss into legacy, absence into meaning, and sorrow into action. David's life, and the love that had shaped it, would continue to inspire, guide, and uplift those who followed. And in that enduring presence, I found a sense of closure, triumph, and quiet contentment that no absence could ever diminish. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of frost and autumn leaves as I walked through the neighborhood toward the community center. The streets were quiet, a gentle calm that mirrored the sense of purpose I had carried with me for weeks. Today was the culmination of everything we had worked for. The final scholarship ceremony, a gathering not just to honor David, but to celebrate the lives he had touched and the legacy that had grown from his short but remarkable existence. As I entered the center, I paused at the doorway, taking in the scene. Students were arranging chairs, teachers were reviewing notes, and volunteers moved quietly, preparing the displays and awards. The room was filled with anticipation, energy, and quiet reverence, a living, breathing testament to the impact of one young man's life. I felt a swell of pride and sorrow, both coexisting in a way that had become familiar over the past weeks. This was more than memory. This was action. Love transformed into tangible change. Emily arrived shortly after the preparations were complete. She walked in quietly, her steps hesitant, her expression cautious. She glanced around the room, absorbing the photographs, the letters, and the stories displayed for all to see. There was no deflection this time, no polite indifference, only recognition. I did not greet her personally. I did not need to. Her presence was noted, but it would not dictate the flow of the day. The focus belonged to David, to his memory, to the students who would carry forward the lessons he had inspired. The ceremony began with introductions and speeches, students and volunteers sharing stories of David, recounting small moments that had shaped their own perspectives and decisions. I listened quietly, letting the words wash over me, each story reinforcing the reality that his life had meaning far beyond the confines of our home or any formal occasion. Every anecdote, every laugh, every tear was a testament to the ripple effect of presence, kindness, and commitment. Emily remained in the back of the room, observing without interrupting, her expression unreadable but attentive. She had finally come, not as a participant in grief, but as a witness to the life and legacy she had neglected. I felt no anger, no desire for confrontation. Her arrival was irrelevant to the reality we had created. The scholarship, the mentorship, the students thriving under guidance, all of it existed independently of her choices. Her acknowledgement, belated and incomplete, was merely a footnote in a story defined by action, love, and remembrance. Throughout the ceremony, I moved quietly among the students, shaking hands, offering words of encouragement, and observing the energy in the room. Each interaction reminded me of David's influence, not in grand gestures or dramatic displays, but in the small, persistent ways he had touched lives. I realized then that legacy was not measured by presence at a single event, by polite words, or by appearances. Legacy was measured by consistent action, by care and commitment, by the lives one touches and the inspiration one leaves behind. By the afternoon, the formal presentations concluded. Students received certificates and small awards, each one marked by genuine excitement and gratitude. Parents and teachers lingered, sharing stories, offering thanks, and engaging in quiet reflection. I stood to the side, observing, listening, and feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. The grief that had once dominated my days had been transformed into purpose. The anger that had once simmered beneath the surface had been absorbed into constructive action. And Emily, now present, could only witness what she had failed to support or honor. After everyone departed, I remained behind, walking slowly through the empty room. The displays of David's life, the photographs, letters, and awards, were still carefully arranged, a testament to the tangible impact of one young man and the dedication of those who had acted in his honor. I paused at a photograph of David laughing, his eyes bright, his smile unguarded. I felt a quiet warmth, a sense of completion that had been elusive in the weeks following his passing. Later that evening I returned home, the air crisp and quiet around the house. I sat by the window, gazing at the stars beginning to emerge in the night sky. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of burning leaves, grounding me in the present. I thought of David, of his laughter, his stubbornness, his gentle insistence on living fully and meaningfully. I realized that his life, though brief, had created ripples that would continue to spread through the scholarship, the students, the community, and through the lessons of presence and love he had inspired. Emily sent one final message that night. "Thank you for showing me. I understand now." I read it once, then set it aside. It did not need a response. The acknowledgement, while belated, was irrelevant to the reality we had created. What mattered was the enduring work, the students thriving, and the love that had been preserved and amplified in the weeks since the funeral. Sitting in the quiet of my living room, I reflected on the journey. The grief had been profound, the betrayal acute, but the transformation was undeniable. I had turned absence into purpose, loss into legacy, and sorrow into enduring action. I had honored my son fully, not through ceremonies alone, but through consistent, meaningful engagement with the world around me. His life, and the impact he had inspired, would endure. As sleep approached, I allowed myself a final reflection. Emily's absence had been a catalyst, painful but instructive. It had forced me to focus on what truly mattered, to act decisively, and to honor David in ways that transcended mourning. The scholarship program, mentorship initiatives, and the ongoing impact on the students' lives were living proof that love, presence, and action endure beyond grief, neglect, and absence. And in that enduring presence, I found a profound peace. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had led me to clarity, fulfillment, and a quiet triumph that could never be diminished by absence or neglect. David's life, and the love that had shaped it, would continue to inspire, guide, and uplift those who followed. And in that knowledge, I knew that the story of grief, betrayal, and legacy had reached its conclusion, not with anger, not with resentment, but with action, love, and enduring remembrance.